Right. And now, Patrick, 3, 2, 1, and we're live. Thank you for coming out, Patrick.
Thank you.
I really
very
appreciate
much.
it.
Thank you.
So you've just come from was it not Nau Tau Kok, was it?
It's To Kwa Wan.
To Kwa Wan. That's the one.
Yeah.
That's the one. Yes, Hong Kong is getting hot these days, isn't
Very
it?
hot, right?
Yeah. But yeah, thanks for coming out. I mean, we met at the Revolving conference. Gosh, almost a year ago now, isn't it? I can't actually. No, it must have been December. Many months ago, at least half a year away.
Yeah,
and then
should be more than half a year.
Yeah, and at that time, you were there with Maida. If I'm correct.
Yeah.
Have some juice.
Oh yeah, we're doing. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You were there with Maida, and at that point you were still working for Amnesty.
Yeah.
And how's things at the moment? I mean, you're no longer working for Amnesty now, is that right?
Yeah, I stopped in April. So
and the reason for that?
Oh yeah, I guess it's like I've been there for 6.5 years. So I just want some change.
Okay.
So I changed to work freelance.
Yeah.
But still, of course, working for some organization with some contract work on doing some research on human rights in China, including Hong Kong, of course. Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
But while you were in Amnesty, oh, you know what? I forgot to set my stopwatch. Okay, there we go. Okay, now I'm able to see. I'm able to see how much time is passing. I'm still a very amateur at this process. Many things I'm learning. So while you were at Amnesty, you were specializing in a few areas. Maybe you can go into what those areas were.
Yeah, sure. So I focused on human rights defenders in China, and then also on Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. So the reason was related to our planning at the organization and our priorities. So we had different projects with different focus. For me, my role as a China researcher, so I focus mainly on monitoring the situation of human rights defenders in China, including lawyers, writers, activists, sometimes even just ordinary citizens like who been petitioners for a long time, fighting against, for example, land grabs and also other issues. And then for Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region that I started in 2018, that I was assigned to work on that issue. It was the time when a lot of media reports, including a lot of international media reports on the situation of Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities or Muslim ethnic groups in that region. They were reportedly detained in the internment camps. So that's how we started receiving a lot of information from various Uyghurs and other individuals who reported they lost contact with their loved ones in the region. So we documented the cases, and then also we interviewed people who reported the cases to us. And then in September 2018, I even flew all the way to Kazakhstan to talk to Kazakhs who told us how they lost contact with their family members in Xinjiang, and then also how several of them, they were former detainees. They shared their experiences in the camps and also told us how they were tortured, how they were mistreated, and how they were forced to attend brainwashing sessions, political sessions in the camps. So basically how I got involved in those areas. And even for this bit on like Uyghurs, it was interesting that I also had an experience to attend a meeting in Japan related to the issue, because for Amnesty International Japan, we have a session there, and they also got some requests from some Uyghurs and also some scholars in Japan who study the issue about Uyghurs, telling them how the Uyghurs living in Japan want to also to testify about the cases of their families back in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. So I flew all the way there also to talk to some of them, and I found, wow, it was interesting to find out, kind of surprised, like to find out about 1,000, more than 1,000 Uyghurs are actually living in Japan. But of course, the majority of them are so afraid of talking to others. So only about 20 of them, they were willing to talk to me. But they also requested to remain anonymous. So it was also quite a different experience to see. For us, we travel to Japan usually just for normal traveling, but wow, that experience made me like kind of had a very eye-opening experience to see the experiences of these Uyghurs living in Japan. And also even more surprising, that's because Japan is so close to China, just across the sea. So they are also very much afraid of whether any Chinese spies in Japan would report their cases back to the Chinese government. So they always find it difficult to trust the Chinese fellow students. And then also even some Uyghurs fellow students, they find it, oh, we don't know whether even they are spies for the Chinese government as well. So it's kind of very appalling, but also interesting experience. So I think it's just like a very brief description on like what I was involved.
Right. Would you mind going into a few sort of like a few of these sorts of cases, just to sort of get a more personal level of what was happening? And then we'll blow it out. We'll look at it from a higher level point of view, as in the reasons why and whatnot. But just so we can sort of understand what exactly were these people put through, and maybe you can relay some of the stories of the families that you came across.
So I think like I can tell you some of the ones I find especially remarkable. So I still can remember, even like not looking at the notes, I can still remember some of the cases. For example, I can talk about the Uyghurs first. I met in Japan those who told me, in one case, what I remember quite clearly even now is that he mentioned that he went to Japan to study because he was very much interested in Japanese culture when he was young. But then later, when he tried to apply for a passport, because like everyone in China, if you want to travel abroad, then you need to apply for your passport. Not like in Hong Kong, you apply through your like immigration department, or like for BNO, you apply through the British government. But for them, everyone in China, they need to apply for the passport from the local public security bureau. That is the authority would decide whether they would give them the passport. So at that time, when he tried to apply, and then he was told something like he was asked a number of questions. What are you going to do in Japan? Well, of course, it seems to be kind of like obvious question. Like if the person is planning to study in Japan, what is going to do? So, but anyway, so that was one of the questions he was asked. But then also, he was asked whether he would return to the region after studying. Someone who just started thinking of like going somewhere else to study, and then immediately, even not starting his studies, and he was asked whether he would return. So nobody knows actually. But anyway, so that seems to be the kind of immediate pressure that he could feel even at the beginning of like the process of applying for the passport. But then later, so he felt that he was lucky anyway, that even like being asked all those questions, he was lucky to have the chance to go all the way to Japan. But then later he found out, like after he was studying for several years, completing his undergraduate studies, then he went on to do his postgraduate studies there. Then it was about the time when we heard the news about all those camps. So he also lost contact with his family members, but still some relatives kept in touch with him through WeChat. And he found out all his relatives been asked by the local public securities in his region, his original region in Xinjiang Autonomous Region, asking them where he is now residing at. Asking them for exact address, his telephone number, and also his student number at the university. So he like suddenly got like very much alarmed, like, okay, I lost contact with my family, and also at the same time my relatives back in the region being asked about my personal information. Like, so that time that he felt like if he returns to Xinjiang, that he could be in the camps. And then also, even later, he got a call from public security back in Xinjiang. And out of the blue, he didn't know actually how the public security officer got his mobile number. Maybe one of his relatives back in the region was too much under pressure, then gave the number to the police. But then the police talked to him on the phone, asking him, when are you going to finish your studies? So will you return to Xinjiang after your studies? And if not, why? And then also kind of hinted, if you don't return, you have to consider what will happen to your other relatives. So that kind of like verbal threats to him. So I'm mentioning this case because it's kind of common for quite a number of Uyghurs. They face similar situation when they've been contacted by public security back in Xinjiang, and also their relatives back in Xinjiang would also indirectly ask them similar questions. So that seems to be kind of pattern, and that happened also to Kazakhs. Like they face similar situation when I asked them. So I think this would be kind of the experience that I have heard, and I find the pattern really kind of similar to a number of cases. So that's why I've been collecting a lot of similar stories and trying to write up some output for Amnesty when I was working there, by compiling all these cases of overseas Uyghurs and Kazakhs. And from those traces, you can see how the pattern they've been of patterns of harassment to the overseas Uyghurs and Kazakhs, and indirectly can prove that, well, how much repression, how much pressure, how much kind of harassment people back in Xinjiang been facing. So I think this there's something like I think like kind of wow, really even made me understand more about the situation.
Now there's people are saying that that Uyghurs are kept in these large sort of re-education, inverted commas, re-education camps, or sort of mind programming camps, or do you have any sorts of stories that go into this. Maybe you could elaborate on them, the kinds of experiences that they face, and first of all, how do you get into such a camp?
Well, of course, with the difficulty to get access to Xinjiang, so we can only hear stories from people living outside. So what we heard from like at least 2 or 3 cases from detainees, former detainees who told us their experiences. And then like one case is a Kazakh. I talked to him when I was in Kazakhstan in Almaty. What he told us was that he only wanted to return to Xinjiang to try to fix his bank accounts, because he wanted to like close his bank accounts and move everything to Kazakhstan, because he already was applying for citizenship in Kazakhstan. But when he returned to the border of Xinjiang, then he was immediately intercepted by police from his hometown. And he was taken all the way back to his hometown, and then he was immediately sent to the camps. And then at the beginning, even like he was like forced to undergo a lot of examination of his like getting his DNA sample, saliva, like blood sample, etc. Pupil, eye pupil. So a lot of DNA data the police collected from him, and then started asking him what you were doing in Kazakhstan, and why you went to Kazakhstan, etc. So it's kind of like similar stories. But then he said like, I was living in Kazakhstan because I was visiting my family there, my relatives there in Kazakhstan. And I stayed there for several years because I was applying for my citizenship there. And then immediately they accused him of like not being loyal to the Chinese government, your country. So it's like you are applying for a separate, for a foreign country's citizenship. And so you are not patriotic enough. And that is the way that he was forced like to tell himself that you were first Chinese. So you're not Kazakhs, you're first Chinese. So you should stay in this country, and you should respect this country, etc. So making him feel like kind of insulted. And then also when he responded, he was scolded by the police, and also he was beaten up when he was not answering satisfactorily. So he was also forced to stand in a position, fixed position like this, like for holding up his arms for hours. And then also when he was not following orders, then he was beaten up by the police. So that was the experience that he experienced for a number of days. During interrogations, and he was repeatedly asked the same questions. It's kind of like also kind of torture to him, like being asked the same questions, even answering the same answer. So eventually he couldn't endure it anymore, and he tried to commit suicide. So he banged his head against the wall, but then he was saved by police afterwards, saying he was sent to a hospital. And then after that, the police may find like it's too troublesome to deal with him, like he may commit suicide again. So out of his surprise, he was set free afterwards, but was told you would not tell anyone what happened to you during detention, or you need to think of what will happen to your relatives. So that was one of the stories that we heard of, kind of like bizarre, but it's kind of possible, and also kind of match with other stories that we heard, and we also saw stories from other reporters about these cases. So I think we actually find like Kazakhs in Kazakhstan seems to be at one point like more willing to tell more cases to testify, and now maybe the attention more will shift to other issues. And now
one moment, are you heading out now, buddy? Okay, man. Have a good one, Sebastian. No problem, buddy. One moment. Have a suck of your water.
You got the keys and everything?
Yeah, I got the keys. I'll lock up. Yeah, sure. All good there, buddy. Can we dip into your mate?
Yeah,
Not many mate left, yeah. How many are left? Have you finished? How much? Do you want something more to drink? All right, okay. Okay.
How many people are coming?
Seven people are coming.
Seriously?
Yeah. Seven. Yeah, but don't worry. Somebody else is also bringing cheese, and then somebody else is bringing some other food.
Is that enough?
That should be more than enough. Yeah, that's more than enough. You grab one, take it home. Yeah, excellent, buddy. Now we've got a bit of an evening group sort of.
7 people?
Yeah, 7 people are coming here tonight, and we're gonna have a bit of a party. It's gonna be lots of whiskey and vodka and gin. It's gonna be great. Okay, man. See you later.
What do you find 7 people? Who are they?
We'll talk about it later. I don't want to talk about their names on air.
Well, you can edit it out, right?
I'm not gonna edit this out. None of it's edited. Yeah. Cheers, man. Okay.
Bye bye.
Okay. So yeah, you were talking about this instance of. No, all right. Okay, continue, please. You mentioned about this. Sorry for the interruption.
No,
Okay.
I just say like the case that I just described kind of like match what we heard from other cases, and also the reports that we saw in other international media reports.
Yeah.
So we do think like now, even like although the question about the treatment of Uyghurs and Kazakhs and other ethnic groups in the region may be kind of diverted by the attention on them is diverted to COVID and other issues, but still we see like recently also, although how controversial and how political it is, that we also saw like the US also passed the Uyghur Human Rights Act. So I think like their plight is still very much attracting a lot of international attention. And Uyghurs and Kazakhs themselves, they still keep testifying about their cases. So everything actually, the attention about them hasn't stopped. So we do hope like, and also I personally do hope the attention on the cases will continue, because I personally know many of them like through, just like happen to know many of them through their contacts. Also like for me personally, I paid a personal trip to Europe last year, just originally just planned to meet some friends in Belgium, France and the Netherlands. But through those friends, I met with some Uyghurs living there, and I got to know, wow, actually there's also a vibrant community in those places, of like Uyghur community in those places. And they also reported similar cases. They're like, gosh, they also reported about how they face threats, even they're now living overseas. That's not something like they feel they're safe, even they live in those countries. So definitely, I think the attention will go on. Yeah.
Why do you think they are being put under this degree of persecution?
Well, I mean, like it's all related to how the Chinese government try to frame your identity. So Well, it's all about like how they try to justify the legitimacy of the government, their rule. But if you just look at like how the appearance of Uyghurs, and now also even like you look at Tibetans, how different they look from like us. We are ethnically Han Chinese, but our facial features, our culture, our custom, etc., so different. But the Chinese government would still try to claim, no, they are one of the ethnicities of the Chinese nation. And even the Chinese nation is like actually what we describe right now is a communist party regime. And they think like, oh, you should follow what we are promoting, like all the communist ideology, all the kind of communist governance, etc. So that's what you should think of yourself first, before you think of your own ethnicity. So I think that is the same issue we face here in Hong Kong, right? So I mean, like, no matter how we can say we have like similar facial features, similar culture with mainland Chinese, but you see, I think the younger generation here in Hong Kong would be even more having a more even like stronger feeling on identity of being a Hong Konger, because we have very different habits, living lifestyle, and also our way of living is so different, and then also a language. I mean, like, to be honest, like for us, our mother tongue is Cantonese, and then English is just because like we started learning English when we started schooling in kindergarten, so it was like kind of cultural background, and also not everyone would speak fluent English, but still we would speak a bit of English because of the culture here. But then like for Putonghua Mandarin, really, it's only my generation. I grew up in the 1990s. Then we started learning some Mandarin. But then now, of course, more young people been forced like to learn even more Mandarin. They're more fluent than us, than our generation when they speak Mandarin. But you can't force people to accept that identity, right? Because it's still very much like our identity is, we speak Cantonese, we have our Hong Kong style of eating, culture, etc., etc. And that actually is the same for Uyghurs. How can you force them to be like, you're not Uyghurs, you're Chinese? So I think it's all related to that. And because the Chinese thing, they can't manage, because so much like, I know, difficult to understand how Uyghurs, they have their own language, their own religion, and then also their customs. And also, if the Chinese government feel like they can brand the whole ethnicity to be kind of problematic, they would choose Muslims, because like in the West, Muslim become kind of like a group. Many politicians, even in the West, would try to discredit them as like terrorists, extremists, radicals. It's very easy for the Chinese government to use the same narrative, but in their own terms. So I think that is the reason why the Chinese government would target them, and because also for Uyghurs, it's very, very, very interesting ethnicity. Unlike Tibetans, who would have like for Tibetans, they have Dalai Lama as the spiritual leader. But when you ask like, okay, Uyghurs, who is your leader? Nobody can actually tell you, because it's really a very different culture. Of course, they have a lot of important figures, like kind of writers, cultural icons, etc. But for them, it's different. Like So I think because of the nature of the ethnicity, that makes the Chinese can quite easily to accuse them of being extremists, terrorists, and then give them a lot of trouble.
Yeah, one thing I found with traveling around mainland is that they've not really been exposed to other cultures that much. It's a rather contained sort of environment. So, well, it's changed a lot significantly because like I can go there and people will not stare at me as much, but I still get stared at.
You've been there, like
no, I've not been that far for northwest, but
Right.
I mean other parts of China.
Other parts
I've
of
been
China,
to
okay.
a number of different parts of China, but normally as a foreigner you'd get a good staring, like, oh look, Uyghur, no,
Yeah.
so I think it is quite easier for authoritarian these like maybe police stations or the people in the hierarchy, especially lower down, closer to the normal people, to look at somebody and say, well, you're more of a foreign, you look less like me, so I will treat you with more, with a heavier hand, sort of thing. Maybe that might not happen so much to the same degree as Hong Kong, because culturally, Hong Kong is closer to Han Chinese than Tibetans and the Uyghurs. So that could be one thing. But do you think that this Belt and Road thing plays a significant role in the CCP's attitude towards cracking down on Xinjiang, or what's it, East
East Turkestan, that's what they
yeah.
usually call.
Yeah. No, I don't think you can call it East Turkestan, right? Because that would be recognizing it as
It's
something
kind
that's
of
not
like,
part of
you're
China.
separating China from, okay, whatever.
You don't want to do it. I know what you mean.
Yeah.
So in other words, if you call it East Turkestan, the CCP doesn't like that, is that
Of
right?
course not.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
they want to
because it's
refer
really-
to it as Xinjiang.
Yeah, like for Xinjiang, it's really like for Uyghurs, they would feel like very much insulted if you
I
just
see.
mention Xinjiang, because it's a name kind of
What does it mean?
designated.
It means like new
A new
frontier.
territory, or new frontier, or new territory, something
I
like
see.
that. But for Uyghurs, of course, they would argue we are Turkic people, so they have like all the traces of their ethnicity. They can claim like they even have a close tie to Turkish people, because even in ancient China, they will always call people from that region say Turkic people. But I'm not an anthropologist, but I can really argue. But as I mentioned earlier, like from their outlook, come on, they're more Eurasian than us. I mean, like much more different. Like they look more like people from like all the different Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, for example.
Yeah.
So it's really very much similar to their culture than our culture. So kind of weird, but anyway, so that's how I can feel the kind of sensitivity, like on the Chinese side, say, okay, well, you say like you're more similar to the culture in those Central Asian countries, so you're trying to separate from us, like kind of, wow, immediately they feel like you're trying to split our country. Okay, but anyway, it may sound crazy, but if you go deep inside the Chinese culture, for the term China, or for the term Chinese, when did it come from? Then we have to question it, because in ancient China, did we call ourselves Chinese?
What did you call yourselves? Like the Qin dynasties? You referred to as dynasties.
Well, of course, yeah. Before it was all dynasties, so it's all referring to like yourself. I'm from like Tang dynasty, so I'm Tang Ren. Qing dynasty, so you're Qing Ren, or whatever. So Manchu, so it's more like but for that dynasty, all the people would not refer to themselves as I'm Chinese. No, sorry, for all the dynasties, we will not refer yourself as Chinese, but it's all like kind of dynasties. But only the idea of nation state was also kind of borrowed from the Western ideas on how you build your own nation state, and it actually started only when the Kuomintang, the Nationalist Party started.
You mean the Communist Party?
I mean, like before Communist Party,
I see.
there was a Kuomintang.
Oh, Kuomintang, yeah.
So they started all the nation state notion, and that's how the revolutionaries fought against the Qing dynasty, how they tried to build, okay, we have a nation state, etc., etc. So that was only the idea on how we had a stronger idea on what Chinese means. So, so even like for now, you still have, I mean, like it may sound kind of outdated, but still, Tangrenjie, like Chinatown, Tangrenjie. So it's actually Tang Dynasty.
Is that what you refer to?
Yeah.
Chinatowns you call
Tangrenjie.
Is that so?
Yeah. And that's
Very
why it's called
interesting.
Tangrenjie.
I didn't know that. Wow, interesting.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's the
wow.
reason why it's called Tangrenjie.
It's because of Tang Dynasty.
Yeah.
My word.
So, why it was referred to Tangrenjie? Because Tang Dynasty was the strongest, one of the strongest periods of the so-called Chinese history, whatever it's called. So, think back this out of the national pride or whatever, the ethnicity, or the pride of the ethnicity. So if you call yourself Tangrenjie. So that's the reason. So.
Yeah. Okay, so from ancient China, we had the nationalist party, who had more exposure to Western ideas and Western philosophies, having nation states and whatnot. So the idea then percolated into the mindset of a certain group of people who said we can create a country with a administration and run maybe in the form of I suppose democracy wasn't really that much around. It was more monarchy and those sorts of things in that time. But then communism came about, and this was with Mao Zedong, right? And because at that time they were exposed to the Soviet Union, right? So ideas from the Soviet Union sort of came about, and to me, I think we can probably go into communism, but I would just want to hear, maybe you know some more information about how the Communist Party sort of came about and overthrow. How was the story? Like, for example, this is going to lead up into the why Taiwan and Hong Kong consider themselves so different to the mentality on mainland China. Maybe you can talk about why the Taiwanese and the Hong Kong people have such different ideas.
Well, of course, I can't speak for others, and also can't speak for Taiwanese, but I can share my own observation and also my own experience. Like for example, for how we have the establishment of nation state of a communist Chinese regime, that we actually go back to even the time before 1949, because before 1949 it was still a lot of mess, because of the Second World War and also the Civil War in China, that even I think if you got a chance, I don't know whether you even got a chance to ask people who lived through that period, would you call yourself kind of Chinese, or and also how you call yourself is a Huayan, ethnically Chinese, or communist Chinese, nationalist Chinese, whatever. But basically, for daily life, I'm pretty sure, even like nowadays, even when you ask people in mainland China, what is your mother tongue? They will not tell you immediately it's Mandarin. It's like my local dialect. And they speak their local dialect at home with their friends. So Mandarin is for more like kind of formal occasions. And when you go to school, you study, and when you go to work, so you speak Mandarin. But when you return to home, you still stick to your own dialect. So it's all related to your own identity. So I think like for a question on like you mentioned about like okay how we got the communist Chinese regime is kind of interesting. First, you mentioned about also the Soviet Union's influence. So it's definitely like during the 1920s, if we look at some of the historical facts, then it's actually the Chinese Communist Party leaders, Chen Dushou, so it's was the first one who tried to establish the communist ideology in China to try to influence young scholars and young people at the time, like Mao Zedong, who was aspired to try to find a way to change China. And they were not happy with the nationalist government because they found it like very much corrupted, like corruption and also still all the bad habits of all these dynasties who left us with. And then through decades, from the 1920s to the time before the establishment of the communist Chinese regime, there were also a lot of internal struggles. Even like from historical documents that you see how the Communist Party actually went through several internal struggle before they formed like kind of who eventually became the leaders. But then like one interesting is, okay, can we actually just say the Chinese follow which thoughts of the communism ideology? Well, of course, it's heavily influenced by Soviet Union, so it's Leninism would be quite dominant. Although, like they claim also, oh, we follow communism. Okay, then which branch? Marxist and Leninist. That used to be like kind of also kind of very popular topics to be discussed among the communist members and leaders. So we can see actually the influence was actually from Marxist and Leninist thoughts. So I think like for those time then how you shape your own thoughts, you try to influence others would also be an issue for Mao Zedong to think of establishing himself as the leader. So he established, of course, the Mao Zedong thoughts, etc., Maoism. So you see, all this been actually related to what the West have been influencing China, because Marxism, like what I want to say is, Marxism and Leninism are from the West, right? You can't claim, oh, they are actually originally from China. No, they are all from like outside. So I want to bring it up is that they are all foreign forces. Come on. So now you are now accusing others, being like, okay, you're having like foreign forces, okay, but sorry, you are also funded by foreign forces. Karl Marx has never been a Chinese. Lenin, no. Is he Chinese? No. So you actually establish your nation based on your connection with foreign forces. So now you're accusing us. You have connection with foreign forces. I would like to hear their logic if they can explain. But that's the history. So you see, they were built out of their connection with foreign forces. That's very clear.
How did once the Communist Party sort of, we have a saying in the West, it's called "get your ducks in a row," which means to organize yourself. Once the Communist Party sort of got their ducks in a row, they then proceeded to, how can I say, ship communism throughout different parts of China, overthrowing different sort of like local leaders or local, sort of like you could say provinces or counties. How did they overthrow the leadership in those areas?
Well, I mean, like for traditional quote unquote Chinese culture, then they have like the strong feudal lords. Like you see, it's more actually like gentry. So gentry, sorry, it's for gentry. Like you have the important local village or town figures, important people who are wealthy, well connected with officials, and also well connected with business leaders, and all the local elites been actually the ones who've been ruling. Really, they're the real ruler, like in your local area. But then, like how they connected with the government when actually the country became very much like the modern nation state structure. Then, because of the overthrowing of the Qing dynasty by the nationalist government, so they started to have the idea on how you work with the government officials from the central government, for example. So it's central local relations. Well, I mean, like in the past, mostly for local officials in like all the years of dynasties, they were scholars. So they passed the examinations, official examinations. If those who are high up, who get like more important positions in the court, the royal court, then if for those who you're just like getting not as higher scores, then you become like kind of local officials in counties, villages, cities.
And they would have reporting lines.
Yeah, you have the reporting line, like just reporting to the emperor. So it's very much like kind of a scholar state, can we say that? I don't know how to describe that, but it's all like kind of all the officials are scholars. And then you have the generals, military, when there needs to conquer your territories, like how you conquer like Turkic people, how you conquer like other parts of so-called quote-unquote barbarians in the time they would call them. So that was the mentality for centuries and centuries of dynasties. But suddenly, like in the early 20th century, then they have the nation state established as the nationalist government. So people they need to learn how to interact with the officials. But those officials are different from what you used to have.
No longer scholars.
No longer scholars.
I see.
But they are
Bureaucrats.
either wealthy business people, well-connected elites, for example. So whole different, we would say that like more like kind of the jargon would be paradigm shift, right? You have a whole paradigm shift on who are your rulers, who are actually the officials. And then also because of the unfortunate historical situation of like having the Second World War and also the Civil War, etc. People actually, they would need to adapt like to the environment on how you respond to the authorities, because this authority is so messy. You're responding to officials, but the officials can also be overthrown by revolutionaries. So you follow your officials, or you try to keep yourself safe by obeying to revolutionaries. That may be a really practical question for many people in China at that time. So I think because of the uncertainties and a kind of like difficult situation they face, that everyone had only to be pragmatic. So there would not be any kind of like how you respond to your government officials or your local officials properly. Yeah.
So I understood that the communists would go into villages or into districts or different areas, and they would try to gain power in these environments. And they would do this by going to the more poorer. Now, in this time, remember, there was not much education. So, people would tend to listen to, somebody who seems to be more powerful, I could say. And then a communist would sort of go into a village and say, Now you see that man up on the hill. You see that man over there with his big house and whatnot? The reason why you're poor is because of him. You go and kill him. So this way they would create power vacuums within different areas, and then from there it would be easier for the Communist Party or those officials that you were talking, those influential individuals, to move in and take power of these places. Is this the case? Is this correct?
I think in many the stories that we have heard from historical books, and also people who documented that part of history, actually show how they try to persuade peasants to oppose their local elites, the wealthy ones. So they would be told it's your right to try to become everyone be equal. But of course the time nobody actually understand what it means, I would argue. But you say you no longer would be slaves for your landlord. You will not be persecuted by your local officials, etc. I mean, of course, it would mean good. I mean, for many people at the time, then actually kind of attractive for many people. I think even at the beginning of the Communist Party's regime, in early 1950s, and still people would still believe, oh yeah, we founded a very good nation, and actually it actually corrected a lot of the mistakes of what the nationalist government imposed on us. So I do believe for that period, many people seem to be wow, very proud of having a Communist Party nation. But then of course what changed things, that was in 1957, 1958, had the so-called the anti-rioters movement.
Anti-writers, the people who write?
No, it's
anti-rioters, R-I-O-T? No?
R-I-G-H-T-I-S-T. So the right, so and the right and the left. So they have the movement called anti-rioters movement. So the 反右运动. So they actually try to start labeling people. For example, you used to be an actress, so you have polluted minds of the communist culture, who we are now a communist country. So you are the rightist, you're not left enough. So that started all kinds of persecution, because you're labeling different people by different categories. So even individuals would be considered, there would be a need to report their relatives if they're not left enough, because you're so right, so you're so much on the right, you're rightist. But then of course that rightist is different from our understanding of our political spectrum as we understand now.
What were the differences between the two different?
But for Western democracy, then you have the left to be the liberals, right? You always have more liberal thoughts, and then for the right, then you're more conservative, and then you try to maintain traditional structure. So that you have the spectrum in between, those who will be more moderate and those who will be more radicals, all these two extremes. So you have the continuum actually there. But then in the Communist Chinese thoughts, even I refer to the 1950s, because the purpose of the government is trying to label different people for the purpose of control. So by labeling, no matter whether you really genuinely the so-called left or right, then you can be labeled as a rightist. And it happened only it doesn't matter whether you have your political belief, your stance to be really on the left or on the right. Even you are a really liberal and very leftist writer, but because you used to be like writing things for a nationalist government, for example,
Bam, you get
then
labeled.
immediately you're a rightist. So that is how, that was the time how unfortunately people would be labeled that way. And then like for example, like some Beijing opera singers, I mean like culture, come on. But you can be labeled as you're rightist because you're opera singer.
So in anything other than the party line, the propaganda that the Communist Party was putting out could be used, anything in opposition to that could be labeled as rightist,
Well,
and should
anyone
be stamped out.
anyone like you criticize Mao Zedong, then you can be. If you like, you criticize Mao Zedong, so you're not really good enough, because you're trying to challenge your leader, and then at the same time, actually, you're challenging his thoughts. So, of course, that on like what would be considered is you're actually challenging his power. Then of course they don't say it that way. They don't want to make it so explicit, because if you say it so explicit, then there's an issue about legitimacy crisis for the rulers. Say, oh, no, we are not that authoritarian. We are so liberal. We allow you to have your thoughts. Now even they would say, you're actually seeing the same thing. What like Carrie Lam and others, and say,
We will go into
Right?
into all of that a little bit later. But
Yeah.
it's important, I think, to sort of lay the foundations over this long period, just sort of really understand what we are dealing with. What and so so it also kind of sounds quite interesting how this tactic was used, and is also now being used over in places like the States right now, where it's like, oh well, it's a crime to be a conservative.
Exactly.
At the moment, right? And even if you had a statue, hundreds of years ago, well, you did something that right now in today's ethical system mindset we consider bad, so therefore we will tear your statue down. My mother once taught me never judge a previous generation by today's by today's ethical standards. Yeah, by today's standards.
Exactly. Yeah.
You should appreciate the history and
also
understand it.
Also the cultural context, etc.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
because
The
lessons can be
context.
learned. Once you understand your history, then you can actually start to predict the future and be a smarter person instead of tearing down statues and doing this sort of thing. Which is what the CCP did, or the Communist Party didn't they? I believe they went, what was it, Great Leap Forward or the Cultural Revolution or something like that. They went throughout China, tearing down statues, tearing down temples, eradicating anything that can have any form of competition to them. Is this part of what you were referring to as this, being labeled as a rightist and stuff?
Exactly like this. I mean, like what the idea of so-called quote-unquote rightist. So every time it's kind of problematic when we refer to the rightist situation in China, because the concept is so fluid. It's so very much like arbitrarily defined by the Chinese what it means by being a rightist. And definitely for Cultural Revolution is a development of the anti-rightist movement that people became even more heavily criticized and attacked by the communist Chinese regime as saying that you are counter-revolutionary.
Counter-revolutionary.
You see that term, right? It's kind of like weird, but because
It sounds like anti-racist.
but it's like okay, because communists themselves
Or
they are
Yeah.
revolutionaries, right? They revolutionaries against the nationalist government. So they retained the term like revolutionary.
sorry, I didn't mean anti-racist. I mean like reverse racism. That's what I mean. It's like it's still the same
But
thing.
you see the
Yeah.
you like the
Yeah, I know what you
dialectical
mean.
situation, the
Yeah.
dialectical concept. I mean, because they abuse the term, they try to make people feel, oh yeah, because that would make you think, and also make like ordinary people, if they don't think too deeply, they're quite easily influenced by such terms. Okay, yeah. Oh yeah, these people are counter-revolutionary, so they're guilty, blah blah blah. And then also, what you mentioned about tearing down like statues or other cultural relics, etc., etc., is an interesting phenomenon. What we see during the Cultural Revolution, as we heard from many of the stories that from people who went through that unfortunate historical moment. About like how the Communist Chinese Party would advocate for people to oppose Confucianism, for example. Now you have the Confucian Academy
In China?
in like overseas, because
Okay.
that's the propaganda. Like, oh yeah, we have the Confucian academies funded by the Chinese government, that they run all these Confucian academy as a way to promote Chinese culture. Say, oh yeah, we have like Confucianism as our Chinese culture, but ironically, they tear down the statues of Confucius, and also they burn all the kind of Confucius masterpieces, etc., the classics. So you see the the craziness about like the madness about this campaign led by the Chinese Communist Chinese Party. Those two eras, like from the 1957 to 58, up to the years like when the Cultural Revolution started in 1965, up to like 1970s. Mid 1970s, all those like almost 20 years, the whole country was in such a mess. You're in an ideological mess, and also you were also in like kind of building mistrust among people, because you will report anyone you feel, oh, you're not following the party line, so you must be problematic. And of course, I think you can talk about that later. But you see, it's quite similar to now that you have the situation in China as well. Okay, you're not following the party line, and you try to borrow Western democracy concepts, and you promote constitutionalism. Wow, federalism. You try to talk about that. Oh, you're so much guilty. So that's what Liu Xiaobo was accused of, because you promoted federalism in your Charter 08 text. So you try to split and try to overthrow the country. So you are accused of not following the party line. So you see all this very much related to decades of ideological struggle led by the Chinese Communist Party.
To me, this is I'm going to get very coarse grain about this in this viewpoint, in the sense that it's basically two relatively vague viewpoints on looking at things. One is the individual, recognizing the individual as its own self-sovereign person, whereas communism uses the concept of a group. Just as an individual has its own identity and its own self-sovereignty, and is responsible for its actions. But in communism, that's not the case. One cannot one cannot hold a group accountable for mistakes. But to me, the way the Communist Party sort of came about in a form of, it's basically a thuggery. It's a kind of mafia, whereby whoever is the strongest will be the leader of this pack of you could say mafia people. But if you show any weakness, somebody will stab you in the back and take the leadership, and they use intimidation to control the ranks of the people. And of course, there's a propaganda arm which says, well, it's not me. I mean, I'm not the, it's the party line. So listen to the party line, and you can't go wrong. And in that way, it's like using fear and intimidation tactics everywhere in order to maintain this degree of power. But this kind of thing is inherently unstable, because and it was kind of demonstrated because Xi Jinping recognized that if the party keeps changing leadership every, 5 years or so? If it keeps changing leadership, there will be a jostling of power, which will destabilize the entire pyramid. So this is maybe the reason why he chose to be a life, a premier for life, basically. Because in this way, like, a stability can form, and he's able to hone this mafia gang. It's just one organized crime. It's a state-level organized crime when I look at these kinds of systems. Because if looking at it, how communism sort of rolled out throughout the rest of China, it's built on murder. Everywhere it goes, it will turn the poorer people against the richer people, asking them to commit murder, doing the Stalin, the Stalin list. It's like, oh, you just talk about your neighbor did this, the X, Y, and Z, and then your name will appear on that list. Next day you're dead. So what kind of people can create this kind of society? Actually, all of us can do that. All of us have this ability to create this kind of society as soon as we start identifying with the group. If we say, oh, I'm not Stewart. My primary identity is I'm a white male. You see what I mean? If I start identifying with these sorts of things, then I no longer need to look at you as a human individual. I can say, well, you're Chinese, I'm white, we're enemies. And therefore I can, and instead of playing the typical communist, back the communism during Stalin and Marx times was very crude and unrefined, in the sense that, they would say, you're the proletariat, they would use the common working class versus the aristocracy. So there's a clear line that you can turn one group against another. And then that was also used in Chinese. But now it's almost like Marxism has become a lot more refined, more clear, and you can see this in taking place in university campuses in America, in the sense that they use this concept of victimhood. Do you see what I mean? So wherever you can find a victim in anything. It's just how you look at it. It's like, okay, you're a white male. Oh, okay, therefore you're the oppressor, and everybody else is the victim. Or you can turn it around, like, and say, okay, well, maybe you're gay and you're not gay. So it depends, and maybe there's legitimate concerns. And I'm okay with gay rights and all of this stuff, but don't make it into something that, becomes a political thing. Do you see what I mean? Where suddenly it becomes like the concept of like Black Lives Matter. I'm totally cool with that. But if you start using it as a weapon for Marxism, that's when I'm not okay with it. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. Of course.
And like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like all his, like what you mentioned, like on how we can look at developments of social movements would be easily trapped into like such situation. Like when it's very always like been very delicate, like how you present and how you affect people, influence people's thoughts about certain ideas and certain movements, and then how it turns can also be dangerous if you turn it into more like kind of related to your own interests. When you're not talking about the common good, but you're more referring to your own interests. And it would dangerously turn into things like what you just described, like because you have different groups of individuals, and definitely each person would have their own interests, right? So even like for a group of people, they would not be unified, right? They have their own. Each person would have their own interests. And that would actually always would end up in how things turn out, depending on how people organize, how people turn things to fight for their rights, and how the government respond, how you respond with the government's reactions, and that actually always will lead to things whether we want to see or not. So yeah, I mean, like it's always been very delicate, but for the Chinese case, like for the communist Chinese case, it's because of the historical context and also the cultural context and situational context, etc., that gave rise to communism. And now even like for like Deng Xiaoping's efforts to open China up to the West, then so you see how communism, the term, you actually need to see the Chinese style of communism, or communism with Chinese characteristics.
I'd like, maybe we can talk a little bit more about this sort of Chinese flavored communism. I mean, it's a bit of a mixing pot, and then how Deng Xiaoping sort of like, well, okay, we're the economic is we're really stuffing up here. Let's add a capitalistic flavor to this. Maybe you can go into this.
Well, I mean, like for us, though, we can understand it like from different perspective about that, of course. But for me, I think like, well, because they really felt the need to open the countries up, they can no longer maintain the legitimacy of the rule by still making the country closed, because you're making people suffering, and people were living in poverty, and you're still claiming all of your ideological support, whatever. Okay, you can play that card for like 10 years, 20 years, but you can't do that
and then
forever.
it'll be the French Revolution, right?
Right, you can't do it forever, right?
Yeah.
So that's the way out. So I would have to say, I always admire how intelligent these Communist Party leaders
I agree with you.
They are very good at politics, I would say.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, they manipulate everything. Though they know how to manipulate people's thinking of what communism is. So they define it for them. Yes. And then they also define, okay, we used to say capitalism is wrong, is problematic. But now actually you can still allow a little bit of capitalism to make our communism great. So that is the way, I mean, like it's all going along the line over the past decades. They've been refining once again and again. They would try to persuade people. You actually, it's very much like a religion in certain ways. Like, right, you see,
a cult, more like
a cult. Yeah, a cult, more like a cult. So you believe, okay, see, we will have a good life if you can allow a little bit of change. So we are not changing drastically. No, that's not good for maintaining stability. That's not good. So we keep slow progress, we keep like kind of slow changes, but that would be fundamentally important to us. So that is always the style. And that would actually make the majority of people feel like, oh yeah, we should try that out and it's safe because we are not changing it like click, it will change the next day. It's not like that. But it's like, okay, wow, yeah, it seems to be like we should do it that way. So they gave like kind of hope, the kind of, no matter like later where we find out it's the false hope or not, but they gave people hope like, yeah, we will see a better future if we change something right now. So in early 80s, so okay, we open the country. So you see, yeah, we do see the development of our economy. And then during the 1980s, where we still have like people like Liu Xiaobo and others say, oh, they started to have like, oh yeah, we could have chance to criticize the government even. So you have like more liberal environments. So they were describing those would be the heydays for liberals in China.
What year was that,
1980s.
roughly?
That was like between 1980 to before 1989.
That's interesting because I know a group of people, one of my friends, he's that age, and he was telling me that like, you will find people in China of that age. Well, this is my age group basically. This age group, the mindset is completely different. The mindset is completely different.
Yeah. I mean, that's what we can have the chance to have people like Liu Xiaobo.
Right.
Because that was the environment that developed people like him, that they could talk freely. Then of course we can, I mean, like it's not good, but you can still see like how we can, criticize people like him being too optimistic, being too idealistic. I think that would be even a better word. Like okay, you're a really good person and you study a lot and you're a very good intellectual, but I would say some of the situation make people become too naive, because you believe, oh yeah, seems to be the leaders would allow you to speed up, and then you even have a chance to develop literary critics, political comments, etc. But eventually you saw 1989. And that was the point, because like this regime is very much like a very strong system to maintain its legitimacy over and over again. They went through Cultural Revolution. They can still survive the regime, and also the Great Starvation, etc., etc. Several rounds of disaster, but they survive it. So
this is why you're like, wow, these people are so impressive. You can create so much chaos, travesty, and great like depressions. People are dying on the streets, and yet you're still able to maintain power all through this. Whereas in other states, particularly France, heads would roll for that. And yet they still have the gall to be able to sit in their seats at the moment and mandate what sort of happens around. It's now because we this will be probably going all over the world maybe. So when you say what happened in 1989, you should probably expand on that.
Well, of course, like apart from what we know about like the stories that we heard like from people like Wang Dan, Wu Kaixi, or the Tan Man, etc., would be actually things what we need to pay attention why it happened, and because of the idealism and optimism created by the Communist Party during the 1980s, making people feel like, okay, we are able to talk, we are able to express our views. So the students, I mean, like, of course, come on, like when you're in your early 20s or in late teenage,
full of beans.
Yeah, I mean, like, you got a chance. Okay, gosh, the government allow us to do so. What will you do? Definitely we take to street, right? I mean, like, come on. We saw problems like, okay, the officials have corruption issues, and government actually encouraging us to have liberal views. Then definitely, why can't we raise issue, and we actually need to point out the problems, and that actually was created opportunity by the Chinese party themselves. And of course, when it comes to a point like you get too many people, and it becomes an issue about legitimacy of the regime.
Well, they start to fear, I should imagine. You're referring to Tiananmen Square.
Definitely.
Classically. So at that point, it's like, look, these guys are already masters at overthrowing places, at taking power. They're masters at this. So when they see a group of people like this, it's like, whoa, this is not going to happen. And in roll the tanks, and the machine guns get turned on.
But I mean, like, when you see when a regime feel very so much challenged by ordinary people who are young people, students, powerless. And when you are sitting as the senior party leader, you are the one who ruling the country. You directly challenge, and especially you see, I know like Wu Kaixi, but then like when he was in his 20s, and he was speaking to Li Peng, the way that how he spoke to Li Peng, the premier, was like, I know you're the leader, you're ruling a country, but if you're wrong, I can challenge you. A student challenging someone in power, how did ruler would feel? Like, I would say, the next thing he thinks of, I would not allow it to happen again. I would not endure it to continue. And that's the moment definitely the state leaders decided, we want to maintain our power. The only way out is to definitely get away of these people.
And then retract back again.
Yeah, you retract back.
But then they still kept on going with this sprinkling of capitalism.
Yeah, of
And
course.
because
they
of
need
course,
that.
Yeah, they need that.
that.
Otherwise.
Yeah, they can't. Otherwise, they can't keep the legitimacy of their rule. Then, because ordinary people would say, but would think like, okay, we just sacrifice a bit of our freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, but we can do business, and we can make a living. I think like many people in Hong Kong also feel the same, right? Okay, fine. Okay, we know. I think nobody would actually be that stupid to understand that we are losing our freedom. But they think, okay, we sacrifice a bit. We don't talk about that. I mean, like, if you don't irritate the government, we can still make a living. It's natural for people in whatever country, whatever system you live in.
More so as a colony.
Yeah.
Because the Brits were, as a colonial power, were one of the better ones because they didn't leave their countries destitute without legal systems and completely raped. Mm-hmm. But they installed common law. They installed some, and more importantly, and actually we should be thankful for this, is the concept of self-sovereignty. Freedom of speech. These things play to the individual versus the group. Remember?
Yeah.
So as a result, it's a very important characteristics that have been transferred to whichever, like even in South Africa. South Africa is also an ex-colony. Fundamentally, the viewpoints, the expectations, but more importantly, actual acting out, the expectations are so completely different between China and that of Hong Kong. And it's quite amusing to watch China play the game of trying to convince Hong Kong people that you're part of China. But fundamentally, the viewpoint is so utterly and completely diametrically different that I wonder these CCP players, they think they're that good. I wonder if they're able to pull over Hong Kong. Do you know what I mean? Maybe we can start to talk a little bit about but before we did, we never mentioned about why Taiwan and Hong Kong Is, we can circle back to that, and because I mean, during this period of where the communism was taking over the Nationalist Party, all of a large amount of thinkers, the wealthier people, they buggered over to Taiwan and to Hong Kong.
Taiwan, in Hong Kong,
And they set up their own things, but the nationalists were also pretty corrupt at the time.
Of course, of course.
So that corruption exists nicely in Taiwan, I should imagine, and here in Hong Kong too.
But of course, I mean, like when you
where there's people, there's corruption.
Yeah, when there's power, and if you have power, then what would you think of next benefits?
Yeah.
Like privilege.
Yeah.
Or to be more exact, like if you what would be making you feel that you're in power? You have privilege, and privilege will lead to what? Possibility for corruption. If the system is not intact, if your system is not having any checks on balance, like on power, then you will have a possibility like to have corruption. And definitely
absolute corruption.
And absolute corruption.
Yeah.
And definitely how you treat people, then you would see like, okay, because I want to maintain my power, and then you definitely would divide people into those who can help me, those who will be my barrier, right? So for Taiwan, I think like the Taiwanese friends can speak more than I do on the situation in Taiwan, but definitely for them, when they fled to Taiwan, there were already people living in Taiwan. Come on, it's not
like a remote
island suddenly, like with people coming. Come on, they have like originally people living there, originally from the island, and also people who went to Taiwan from mainland or from other places to Taiwan over centuries. And then it used to be like the Japanese colony. When the nationalist leaders and etc. fled there, so it's a very complex culture, like, and also like kind of multicultural, and so it's very interesting to see how the Taiwanese people, they would think, can you call me Chinese?
No.
I think they have more problems than we do.
Oh yeah.
Comparatively. I think like if I were Taiwanese, I think, oh, come on, I'm really Taiwanese. How can you say I'm Chinese? Because my culture, when I grew up, like, okay, my grandparents, they were under Japanese rule. And then they have also the local culture of all these different ethnic groups. And they all have like intermarriages. And then also over the years, if we even pull back to the even older colonial times, the Netherlands, the Dutch,
yeah,
and also Spanish and many others, they also actually passed through that strait. Come on, it's a very complicated story. So it's not like as simple as we can. Oh, come on, Chinese. So it is actually a very complex cultural issue. So I think for Taiwanese and Hong Kongers, then we would have some kind of similar sentiment, would be like the resistance to accept the concept of Chinese. Because, come on, not everyone would really want to have any kind of national pride. Why you need to impose people to have national and ethnic pride? So like, come on, now it's actually exactly what the way, like with national security or whatever other issues, it's very much related to how you want to impose people to have the mentality of like, you should feel proud to be an ethnicity. So you need to have all these conditions. Otherwise, what's the point of doing that?
To me, as soon as I hear the argument of nationalism, there's a part of me that sort of takes a step back and says, oh, what you're doing right now is you waving the flag in my face. And you're waving the flag so close to my face that I can see nothing else. You see what I mean? You are deliberately blinding me with this stupid flag. And
exactly.
I would much rather see what's behind the flag, the thing that you're trying to hide. And as a result, passing idiotic things like this national security or national insecurity.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, it is a national insecurity.
National anthem. So if I don't sing the anthem, so actually I can't
what are you going to do? What are you going to throw me in prison? What are you going to do?
Yeah.
You want me to do? Yeah, you want me to go to prison? Exactly. So it's like
Gosh.
but this is a steady erosion of, or introducing concepts of groupthink into the mindset of Hong Kong people and starting young. A good place to start is in the schoolrooms.
Of course.
Stand up, you damn child. Put your hand on your heart and do whatever you need to do. Other countries have got something similar. So, how do you? Right now, I think the priority is to get this groupthink introduced into Hong Kong. But the thing is that you're going to have a real difficulty doing that because Hong Kong's got over 150 years of being being the gateway into China, interfacing with the rest of the world, doing business with the rest of the world. Very smart, and a lot of money too. I'm kind of curious to see how this is going. What's your opinion on this new national insecurity law that they want to put in?
Well, I really like your description, on national insecurity, because it's really they're feeling so insecure that more and more people will feel, we don't want to call ourselves Chinese. We don't really follow what the Communist Party, the communist regime been doing, and then also Carrie Lam been losing actually popularity as even more. And also all the apparatus would not be working as the Communist Party wants. Definitely, I think it's a way to try to silence critics, to turn people into completely in favor of the Communist Chinese rule, saying, actually you can completely become Chinese. And we actually have a country to support you, and you so much rely on us anyway, right? There was the kind of propaganda that you don't have China. That's the way how the kind of claims would be. You don't have anything. You don't have the water, you don't have resources. You have to be completely reliant on China. So. The only way out for you is to become us. There's no way for you to become British. There's no way to become American. So that's the only way for you to become Chinese. And that's your identity. There's no argument. There's no opposition on that. So that would be the kind of political mentality of the Chinese government. That they want to shape everyone in the city to be called Chinese only. You are not Hong Kongers, come on, you just Chinese. But I think it actually falls also into the same problems of ethnicities issue. As I mentioned earlier, we Hong Kongers, we have different language, but then also people like you're living in Hong Kong, and you also part of our culture. And then also, what about Indians, Filipinos, and also Indonesians? That actually they form also part of our culture. For example, not to mention many others. So, how can they call all these people Chinese? Come on, they've been living in this place for many years, and we've been living actually multicultural environment, that we would not being just because we are so proud of being Chinese, so we think the other people living here, they have no rights to live here, no, or they don't have the kind of benefits that we should all be entitled to. Although of course there's still a lot of inequalities in the city because of various structure. But we would not force an Indonesian domestic worker. You should call yourself Chinese before you can live here. No. It means like kind of making everything like kind of problematic. So I think I don't know how they deal with actually such a multicultural environment here. Maybe they just don't deal with the non-Chinese ethnicities. Here, you just live here, but you're always considered expats, foreigners. So they will not call you Hong Kong resident as the way kind of we understand.
I think their attempt to sort of create this sort of system, or to deal with the multicultural problem, was to create this concept called one country, two system, which communism. It's a very interesting thing. I recall when I was in South Africa, I knew a Mr. Lee, and he was Taiwanese, but he also ran away from communism. And he said to me, communism can be summed up in this sentence. He said, what's mine is mine, and what's yours is mine. That's the typical mentality for communism.
Very much like that.
Yeah. I mean, I can sum it up nicely there. And by creating this this one country, two system, there's supposedly a contract that was in place, and if the contract works to the communists' favor, to the CCP's favor, then the contract is good. If it doesn't work to their favor, well, then let's just break it. Yeah. God damn it. We don't have any respect for things like that, But what I find so interesting is that the current hierarchies have been infiltrated by the CCP. One typical tactic that they will use is they will extort, they will corrupt smart individuals, basically handing loads of money to them. The smartest students in the classes will almost inevitably be consumed by the Communist Party. They will get positions of good opportunities, good salaries. But you have to do one thing: be loyal. So this is one thing that the Chinese have done, is that instead of using sound economic principles, they have inflated the hell out of their currency. Now, and really, it's. I had a discussion with Mike Spencer Bowen. He was number 2, and he was saying building out the Belt and Road system is basically it's surplus. In other words, there's so many companies within China that need to work, and the CCP is making sure that they do have something to do. So in other words, if they didn't have a job, if they didn't have money flowing into the system, then the company would go under. So they need to do something. Okay, what are you going to do? Okay, you're going to build railway across Eurasia, connecting up with Europe. You're going to we're going to build up systems in different ports. And essentially what they're doing is they're exporting Chinese influence throughout the world, and specifically in Africa and whatnot. So what they're doing is that they're inflating the hell out of their currency. And when their currency becomes worthless, on the same level as toilet paper, you're going to introduce some very, very severe socioeconomic problems into this environment. What do you think of recent endeavors in something called the e-yuan, or the e-RMB, which is essentially using a blockchain technology to create a new, essentially it's a state-run cryptocurrency. Do you know much about this?
I haven't studied like in details, but I understand like what you're talking about. That I mean, like things like that actually would actually what correspond to what you mentioned about the CCP's also own consciousness about economic situation, and they need to find ways out how to maintain. So I do think like if they actually would be very much like aware of the existing problems, especially on the economy. So apart from this, that you see also 5G, like et cetera, kind of technology, that would be the way how they try to establish their own. While they know it very well that because they don't still have the capacity and the technology to build their own without getting support from the West. They need to still rely on the West to try to do their own. So they have to cooperate like with the West, especially the US, like in certain ways. So I think like for this also, like they think like because the UN actually you see even now because of the US-China relations, you see everyone will understand what's happening.
But you should explain it a little bit, just in case there are people that
Yeah.
don't understand what is happening.
Well, I mean, like, because of Hong Kong and also the COVID situation, and the U.S. government now, of course,
They've gone inward.
yeah, I mean, like bipartisan. It's not like just one party, but it's the Democrats and also the Republicans would also be criticizing China for all the COVID related and also Hong Kong related issues, and that's all really hurting economy. Then definitely, like if you ask people in China, nobody would want like to have a like a bad relationship with the U.S. because the Chinese government want to maintain, we have the nationalist mentality, but come on, you're now turning country already in a capitalist, very much like capitalist society. So everyone would be more concerned about how to maintain their business, how to make a better living, and that's the way to improve their lives, and that would be to continue strengthening and building the links and connection with others instead of closing the country. So with that in mind, definitely the government would try different means to maintain or to try to keep the economy up. But of course, everyone knows it's difficult, hugely difficult when you are actually having such cooling down or very bad relationship with the US and the West. And the most hit would be business people, to be honest. They would not admit that, but you can see how the economy actually shows the reality.
Which will stir, which will stir sentiments of rebellion against the CCP potentially. As a result, CCP would probably become more closed. Xi Jinping has taken more of a Mao Zedong sort of mentality, becoming much more nationalistic, sort of closing off the borders, which I don't see how that helps, because as soon as you do that, you're going to revert back to the days of how are you going to create trade with the rest of the world? How are you going to create? Yeah. So like the way Xi Jinping is playing this game at the moment, to me it feels like somebody's going to come behind him and put a knife in his back, because he's playing dangerous games, in my opinion. He's trying to kill the golden goose the goose that lays the golden egg. And Hong Kong is a very influential place, right? Like you doing this, you're going to be stepping on people's toes. Just even within the Communist Party, I heard that Carrie Lam is there's I forgot what he is, but there's a guy within the Communist Party who's responsible for Guangdong area, and Carrie Lam is
Han Zheng.
maybe
Han Zheng,
I think
yeah.
so, and I think this guy Han Zheng has very different viewpoints from Xi Jinping, right? And they're enemies, maybe I hear.
Well, I mean, like, of course, that for the Communist Party, it's not just one party line.
No, yeah.
There are lots of various internal struggles and infighting, of course. But I mean, of course, we can't. I'm not an expert like about studying the party infighting in the Communist Party, but of course, they've heard different rumors from many people, like how party infighting would end up actually would not be what we expect the Communist Party would want, because for Xi Jinping, of course, definitely his main goal is to maintain his power. If I were him,
and which woman to sleep with?
yeah,
Exactly.
I don't know, maybe yeah. But then I think for him, if I were him, if I'm now in power, the best things I need to think of is how to maintain my power. And then, like, that's how he changed the constitution to allow the president can stay in power for much longer than it was originally allowed, because the practice was like 10 years for each state leader to be president. And then you need to, give to the next generation. But now he changed that. So how long he will be in power will be a big question. But we have to also, but we can't keep everything unchanged, constant. You need to think of what other things may also push him down. So it's a big question on like how we see the party infighting would affect the things that we are seeing now, because it definitely would be an issue about who will eventually win power. And actually you have also like some other price links, like the party senior leaders like Bo Xilai, who lost power a few years ago, and also that for Lin Zhihua, that they used to be like the ones who would think of thought of like being next stars to be the leaders. But you would also see different names also being now also mentioned who would be the next Xi Jinping or so. But definitely there's not just one party line, even multiple millions, or not, if not millions, maybe thousands of different party lines. Because people, when you're in power, you think of how you collude with your like-minded people to maintain your power or to win power. So there would be definitely a lot of movements in the party, and definitely would affect many fronts in Hong Kong. Then the biggest question is on like how we can maintain Hong Kong to be visible internationally, continue to make it even more visible, and to become like kind of maintaining the international attention on Hong Kong. And that would be the only way to save Hong Kong, to be honest. If we don't have that international attention, and it would be really difficult.
Yeah. Two things come to my mind. First of all is both sides do propaganda. The protesters, as well as the pro Beijing. Now, to what degree do you think? I mean, we can open this up. It's going to be a large discussion just in itself. But to what degree do you think protesters are harming the international viewpoint of Hong Kong by lying, by taking stories out of context, by giving people an excuse to say, you deliberately tried to manipulate me there? That's the one thing that I believe that, the very protesters who want to have this international viewpoint are actually going to destroy it for Hong Kong, is by lying. My father told me that never cry wolf, right? You know the story, never cry wolf, right? You cry wolf too many times, nobody's going to believe you. And then the second point forgot what the second point was. Forgot what the second point was. No, but I mean, yeah. I'm not. Do you honestly think that just by maintaining international, the international eyes on Hong Kong, especially in times of COVID-19, people don't really give a shit? People don't care.
But I mean, like, I would argue that, like, in any movement, there would be different opinions, different people who have different interests. That's normal. Like, you look at whatever movements you refer to, because we're talking about individuals. But you're talking about a government, like a Communist Party, that they also have different, like, views, but they do have a more central party line to try to exert control on people. Then of course they establish their line of propaganda. But when we talk about the protesters as individuals,
as soon as they put up a head, they cut the head off.
Exactly. I mean, like, you have to argue, like, who organized it? Who are the organizers? And come on, even like for pro-democracy camp, the legislators or politicians, can they say they're the organizers of the protest? No. They can't claim the credits of being the organizers.
But yet 15 of them were arrested.
Well, of course, they're being singled out and targeted because they're more influential. And the government will think, okay.
Martin Lee, hey? Martin Lee, the guy who drafted the one country, two systems, basic
the
law.
Hong Kong basic law. I mean, like, of course, like, that is the pattern. What the Communist Party would always do, they single out people, and then they would try. That's what the Chinese way we say, to kill the chicken to scare the monkey. That is the Chinese way of saying.
Can you expand on that? What do you mean by that? So the monkey sees you killing the chicken and says, "Oh, this guy's a predator. He can do damage. Therefore, I'm not going to mess with him." Mm-hmm. Interesting.
That is exactly what the expression means. Like, so when you threatening, you're killing someone,
or somebody low, somebody
low, then okay, then you're watching it, then you would feel threatened, and you would feel, okay, maybe I should readjust the way how I behave. So that is what the Communist Party want. But then, like, for many of the protesters, like, you see,
they know this.
Of course they know this,
and they're not afraid.
They're not afraid, and they're young. But I mean, like, why I always like emphasize young. Like, okay, when you like my age, like 40, 50, like 60, then you have more things to consider, right?
You're more chilled out too.
Yeah, exactly. Like the expression.
You don't get so emotionally riled up.
Like for young.
When you're young, when I was like 20 or so, it's very easy to do stupid things because you are stupid.
Well, even like we are not even like describing whether you agree with their behavior or not, like whether you think they're stupid or not. But you would be more prepared to do things to try to express yourself.
Sure.
And then I'm not saying like I would agree with like throwing stuff or burning stuff. But when you feel like you're young, like in your age, like 20, like teenage, and then you think you see the police officers being beating up. What I'm doing actually, that you would try to compare and say, okay, what I'm trying to do is not beating up people, but just like, throwing stuff. Yeah. So when you like proportionality, something like for people at the scene, at the protest scene, when you see, then immediately you would be feeling, okay, I should do something to challenge them. So it's very easy, like for in a situation as messy as like in a protest, and you see people being beaten up by police, immediately your response will be how or what I should do to help is to fight back against the police. So it's getting like more like a vicious cycle.
Yeah, I mean, the police are a peacekeeping force. They're just a peacekeeping force, and frankly speaking, I pretty much know this. They don't actually care who's in power. They just want the peace. They just want peace and quiet, and they will. I mean, this is what the state does. If you break the peace, if you challenge the peace, they're going to come down heavy and hard. And our societies are filled with all sorts of strange people out there. We've got people from high-minded noble laureates all the way down to murderers. You see what I mean? And the job of a policeman is an extraordinarily difficult one. Extraordinarily difficult one. You need to be able to factor in and cater to all these different sorts of people, ideally, with enough training, which I believe the Hong Kong
training
police
is important, of
yeah,
course.
with which I believe the Hong Kong police force had or does still have, hopefully. But I mean, this is what the state does, and I find it quite interesting that Hong Kongers were surprised when they saw policemen,
I think that
beating.
because the kind of surprise is not like it's not like I would not expect police to disperse crowds when you see a big mass protest, because eventually after protest you still need to back to order, right? But then in the past, even like when we took part in mass protests, we were in good terms with police. Come on, the police
They were
actually
holding
arranged us.
Yeah, they were
to
holding.
mass,
Yeah,
right?
protesters were holding umbrellas out for police. Yeah.
And the police would also say, okay, be careful. So we walk that way, and then they would guide us on like which route you can walk. That was the old days. Then actually more like orderly and then more calm.
14,
Yeah. But now it's so different. It's so unfortunate, but it's like because of the regime trying to use a heavy hand, and the police actually, you see, for disciplinary force, it's also very easy to be kind of brainwashed in a certain way. You need to follow orders, and you actually, what you're doing, you're beating up protesters, is actually implementing or carrying out your job. In the past, maybe you're like in the training, in the past you will be reminded you should treat protesters as citizens. But now what they call in protesters, cockroaches, come on. So it's a bit dehumanizing.
This is a very common strategy. This is how human beings deal with it. I totally understand this process. It's like you are. I don't totally understand it because you need to dehumanize somebody. If I'm going to do certain actions onto you, which have been given the AOK by seniors above me, said, I don't care what you do, you have to get these people under control. You have to reason and rationalize it away. And what you're going to do is you're going to dehumanize them by giving them a name. But the protesters have done exactly the same thing with the police.
But that is always kind of vicious cycle, right?
Yeah, but no. I mean, but it's not. You can't justify one for the other. Doesn't matter. Both of you guys are playing the same game. Yeah. It's like the stork trying to eat the frog, and then the frog is strangling the stork at the same time. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I'm not like saying like I would agree what the behavior would be. The problem, how it would end up like a vicious cycle, is when you, the police, you have the weapons, you have the power, and you are actually having all the gears. At the same time, while citizens will think, okay, when I try to exercise my rights for protests, and I can see like you're getting more violent, then I get more violent. It's that this kind of like reaction. So it's unfortunate, but it's something like kind of inevitable.
Yeah, I agree with you. It would be an inevitable, and I think there are probably more effective ways of protesting. For example, one of them would be to stop using the Hong Kong dollar, create your own currency.
Well, that would be more like kind of like create. I do agree. Like of course that maybe that we need to find out like more creative ways, and then to try to express opinion. But that would also depend on like how we think of the development and maturity, and also different aspects of the society, whether we can gather enough people, a mass, to exert certain level of pressure, and also we need to reevaluate like how the government will think of such pressure, whether they think it's effective, whether they think, oh, I don't really care, they just ignore it. So it's kind of complex. But of course, we also need to think of like, because different individuals would have different purpose. If like for us who are mostly like just researchers, academics, intellectuals, then we try to influence people by saying what we think it should be, the way that it should be handled. But then like for young people, if I'm really like kind of taking part in the action, the immediate reaction would be how to fight back against the police. And that actually would unfortunately make things become more militant. And this, I would say, is highly unfortunate to see how our younger generation would be dragged into such situation, and then even they would become even more radical when they see like kind of more desperate.
This is what I'm worried about.
And now they see, oh, we are those so desperate. What can we lose?
Yes.
So we could just fight with our lives.
And now apathy starts to come into the mindset of the Hong Konger, and you can start to see them. It's almost like taking the next generation, and then it's like putting meat into the meat grinder. You know what I mean? Like cannon fodder. And why does one shouldn't do this? One shouldn't. There are more effective ways of because it is a power game. It is a power game. Let's make no mistake. I mean, you're up against one of the most influential, dangerous organizations, what I consider in the world, and deeply organized. But they are big and they are slow. But they're also got a lot of experience in overthrowing people and subverting government and people. But you know, we saw from how organized the protesters are. It's just there are much more efficient ways. And I think, and my personal opinion is that there's this concept of a not a red economy, a yellow economy, as well as a, I think, is there a blue economy too?
I don't know.
I don't know.
We would just say like yellow economy, and then
so
obviously, actually, even if we can call like some would be blue economy or just red economy, because it's so communist.
Because it
supporters.
Okay, so my slip of the tongue, red economy, was accurate then. Yeah, I mean, like Hong Kongers really know where maybe the more mature ones know where to fight, and that's with the money. That's where you choose to spend your money, and I would go as far as to say that be very careful, because at the moment I think, you know, what's it, the Rockefeller guy? He used to say, I don't care about the law. Or it just give me control of the currency, and I have complete control. And my opinion is that like Hong Kongers, specifically the yellow economy, is probably big enough to be able to create their own sort of like sub-economy by using a currency that they might create. And instead of taking your young people and throwing them against the police, or even taking to the streets, we know this is not working. It's not working. So stop it. Take all that energy, all that anger and all that hatred. Don't express yourself with anger and hatred. Express yourself with the thing that Hong Kong is bloody good at. And that's business-minded, you know, laissez-faire kind of entrepreneurial things. Reach out with the rest of the world and do business with people. But don't use the Hong Kong dollar. Because that Hong Kong dollar is going to be subverted by this ERMB crap that the CCP is going to be putting onto to the Hong Kong mind. And we can already see that maybe like China is going to be becoming more closed. But if you look at what's going on with Southeast Asia, good God, I mean, Vietnam, Thailand, a lot of these places, you can see that they're relatively organized. COVID hasn't hit them nearly as bad as what we thought were organized countries. So and there's a lot of resources and a lot of opportunity to do business out there. So instead, turn your mind and your attention towards Southeast Asia. So Hong Kong maybe can become the gateway to Southeast Asia instead of being the gateway to traditional
To
China, right? So just turn around a little bit. There are much more efficient ways of fighting this system, and one of them is just to completely step out of it and just bring more people along the way. Yeah, I mean.
Well, of course, I think like what you mentioned would be one of the way out. I mean, like people can think of like how try different ways of tackling the current very demoralizing situation. Then, well, I do think like actually because like we as mentioned, like so much like a multicultural society. Definitely, I think some people would also share your thoughts, and also definitely people would try to find different opportunities. And I mean, like of course, what you mentioned, like the kind of description of Hong Kong has always been like kind of pragmatic.
Very
right?
pragmatic.
I mean, like of course, like we try to be like really pragmatic because that is our like very much like our instinct. But then, like of course, the thing like it also surprised many people with like how our younger generation now been like so stagnated to what's happening on the streets.
What do you mean stagnated? You mean I forgot the English word. You mean immune or so? There's an English word for this, and I'm probably sure everyone's busy thinking of it. So inured, not inured, but like they. Oh, is it normal to see somebody getting
it's
beaten?
Getting more normal. Yeah. Like it's getting more and more. I mean, like for us who have been like working on human rights issues for like I have worked on like human rights issue for about 20 years. In the past, when we organized protests, apart from like the mass ones, usually the process that we organize for smaller ones, like for Chinese human rights defenders, etc., only very few people would join us. I mean, like, and also like, of course, for some people who work on labor union, trade unions, they also have small scales of protests. I mean, like, always happening. But the majority of the people would not join. And then, like, now it seems to be like the government's reaction, government's, handling of the situation, like the extradition bill and etc., instead create public anger and even push the young people to become protesters, I would argue. I mean, maybe they used to be just interested in video games and meeting friends, but now they're being pushed to become protesters in certain ways.
The CCP needs an enemy. So why don't you manufacture one?
Yeah.
And now what we can do is we can get this national insecurity law to say, well, only a minority of the people are going to be affected by this, and that's the people that we've manufactured. Mm-hmm. That's the people that we've created. Mm-hmm. So this is why I'm it's like Hong Kongers are very good at business, and they're not political. Generally, they're not very political. Yeah. They try to steer away from politics as much as possible, and but now suddenly everybody's starting to wake up.
Everyone,
politically,
yeah, kind of political awakening.
But at the same,
sudden.
but at the same time, it's almost like the lack of experience has shown like certain cracks or weak lines in their thinking, which is like very easy for the CCP to exploit.
Yeah,
and play these games.
I do agree. Like you see, like those politicians that in the past, like the democracy one, have been criticized for many years for by being just always being the same group of people, and then like the young people cannot or would not be interested in actually in their business, their political game. But now you see so many people suddenly wanting to run for electoral election.
Oh yes, and we saw.
Wow, and see, like, come on, like even
I was shocked.
New names that you have never heard of. Oh wow.
And youngsters,
Youngsters, and then now you see like I would say, come on, it's the government itself been responsible for this political awakening. You push people to the extreme, and then people feel like, I have no choice, but I need to fight back. And then now more and more, so you gradually nurturing a new generation of people who are so much into politics, much more than us.
I've never voted in my
Gosh.
life. I've never voted in my life. Because, I vote with my feet. If I see a country going to shit, I go find another country. And that's why I loved Hong Kong so much. Because there's one God here, and that's money. and efficiency. Do you know what I mean? So, yeah, I hear exactly. I mean, seeing all the districts, I believe it was only the outlying islands. Those islands far away from anything, Hong Kong, which were like pro Beijing. The rest was, I don't know, what was it? Yellow.
That I always like jokes with my friends. I'm a person like I grew up in a very much like a middle class family, and to be honest, because of my experience, like my job, I was a journalist, so I cover like how things happening in China and in Hong Kong, and I went to different places to see all the sufferings and plight of people. So I eventually became an activist working on human rights issues. But personally, of course, I do enjoy life. Like I would rather spend more time on like enjoying food or traveling with my friends and my loved ones than like talking about all this. Come on. But the government been pushing people like me, who may only like usually been like very much laissez-faire, like usually just very much laid back. But suddenly we have to speed up. So you're pushing people to become political. So it's something what unfortunate, but come on. For people like in my father's and my mother's, my parents' generation, we only talk about exactly what you described, just like how or which restaurant we should go to enjoy our food and wine next time. So usually the conversation would be like that. But now even like, okay, in families, would I rather talk anything about what's happening in Hong Kong with my family? No, sorry. I don't want to get into that conflict, but it's so common for so many families in Hong Kong.
It is so sad.
It's so sad. Come on.
Yeah.
We used to just talk about what things we can enjoy together.
That's right.
Now we can't enjoy together so happily.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, this is quite a painful, what you just touched on there. So for context for the international audience, the family is a very, very close-knit thing here in Hong Kong. And of course, because of space, the apartments are not very big. So it's very important that you maintain good relationships with your family members whom you spend so much time with in close proximity to. So, like this introduction of this political thing that has happened into Hong Kong has driven a massive stake between the elder generation and the youngsters who have become much more radicalized due to this onset of communism, to the point where youngsters are being kicked out of the apartment.
Yeah.
They are sleeping on the streets.
That's very sad, yeah.
Yeah.
But that seems to be the situation pushing them, that they can't feel comfortable to stay at home. And then also their family will feel like, I don't want you here.
Yeah.
So I mean, like, come on, it's actually all these people who are now in power, they should be held responsible for. Come on, you guys, you're just into like making all this mess.
Okay, so why is Beijing doing this to Hong Kong? Why is Beijing doing this to East Turkestan? I think it comes down to this Belt and Road thing. This is a longer term plan to sort of exert influence into the greater, the rest of the world, taking over Africa for resources. And well, now it sort of becomes like, speculation sort of thing, like controlling the new Silk Road, connecting Europe to China and using China as the manufacturing hub, and then exporting goods via railway as well as roads to Europe, increases the opportunity of doing trade. But Hong Kong is one of the top 3 financial centers of the world, and by getting this RMB currency in circulation in Hong Kong, they then get a massive step up on an international stage by using this currency, a new modern digital currency, based on blockchain, which is verifiable, etc., etc., etc. I don't know, and in my opinion, this is a power play. This is a power play to the point where, and also on another hand, now I might be a little bit conspiracy theory about this, but I think there's a lot of play into destabilizing, using typical strategy and techniques into destabilizing the West, particularly the watchdog of the world, which is the United States of America. Look at the state they're in. Typical communist tactics are being used all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, like, of course, like, all this would make you feel happy. Like,
I'm not finished. Sorry. Which brings China to the position of eventually being able to challenge the US dollar as the international currency of the world.
That may be their aim. Yeah, I mean, like,
this is what I think the game is, and this is the reason why Hong Kong is in the firing line, is in the sights. You see what I mean? So, like, the youngsters who get emotional about this, who play up and give a reason for, like, bringing like this national insecurity law into play. You are doing what the communists refer to as a useful idiot. A useful idiot is somebody who is not smart enough, but you can get them to do something that will help you in your cause. You see what I mean? It's like, I don't want you to do A, so I will say, do B, and then it's difficult. That example is pretty shit. But basically, it's like I can influence you to achieve a goal that I don't have to do. Do you see what I mean? Maybe it might be to kill somebody or to do something. Typical example, the way communists moved into different villages in China, they say, okay, we need to make a power vacuum. So you guys kill them, and then we will move in place. But we didn't do any killing. Blood is not on our hands. Blood is on your hands. So, yeah, I think youngsters need to get smart very quickly, if you want to be able to take on. This is another thing I wanted to talk about. You know what a psychopath is? Psychopath is somebody who have no emotions. You could say have no emotions, and they are essentially predators. They're not very organized, but they can read emotions, and they can manipulate emotions in you. They are masters at this, and the whole goal and the whole thing is to gain resources out of you, and they will treat you they're like a vampire, right? They'll suck the blood from you, and once the blood is out of you, throw you away. Just like a lion. Do you think when a lion looks at a sheep, do you think the lion feels sorry for the sheep? Not at all. Not at all. The lion is just going to eat that sheep. And that's the same thing of what the Communist Party, to me, they're a bunch of psychopaths. To get to this position, you need to be psychopathic in nature. And Carrie Lam doesn't look at Hong Kong citizens or Xi Jinping doesn't look at Hong Kong with empathy and compassion. No, these are sheep. These are sheep to eat. That's all it is. So and now the next question is like, well, okay, you normal human being, you feel emotions just as your brothers and sisters do. How do you handle yourself when there is a psychopath in the room? Because a psychopath is like a predator, is only effective when they're in the shadows, when you don't know where they are. Because a predator hides in the shadows and jumps out and kills you or hurts you. So a psychopath will typically come into an environment and create chaos. Deliberately create the chaos and then hide inside the chaos. And then start to control things like, arresting the 15 top pro-democracy people. This is essentially what psychopaths will do. They will create the chaos, and then they will start to extract resources and do things the way they are. So if the only way to recognize this is really, as soon as you know that there's somebody who's a psychopath, you give them nothing. It's like, imagine you make a force field around you which has no cracks in it, which has nothing that a psychopath can jimmy open and get into you and manipulate your emotions. This is the most important thing. It's like, if you allow a psychopath to start playing at your emotions, you're over. You're done for. And this is what's happening with the youngsters, because youngsters haven't been exposed to so many psychopaths. You see what I mean?
Of course not. I mean, I get your point, and then of course, definitely, for people who have a bit more experience in dealing with such a regime or such a power, then we would definitely think how we can be more strategic, if that would be more kind of term that we would use to respond to the current situation. And definitely, if to be more strategic, and that you would endure certain things, and then we try to get more organized and wait for the right moment to fight back, and then in a more we think would be more effective and useful way. But then if it comes to what you described, just there's such as chaos, then it's kind of also out of control. For people who even want to try to make things more organized or try to respond to the situation more strategically. So I don't want to just say what we can encourage the young people to do, because so much now they've been, as we described earlier, unfortunately now been politically awakened. Well, unfortunate, but in the way also fortunate, because they now see more they may not understand before. But the problem is that now they are left in a very difficult situation. And of course, for us, okay, we make comments, we all now also face the possibility, potential danger to us if we speed up in future. What will happen if the law would be implemented? But for more, what we can see, what with the regime, what you described is like a lion looking at the sheep. What would they do and they're actually already been doing by arresting the young protesters on the streets, throwing them to prison, accusing them of various kind of strange charges. And we are seeing that. And now we are standing, trying to help, but we also feel kind of helpless. Come on, you're actually ruining our next generation. So it's something actually really, I think what you mentioned is really good for us to review strategies and also to think of what we can do next to find more effective ways to respond to the situation. But of course, it would not be easy. Well, we have so many stakeholders, you have so many people having different parts in the movement, or various people taking part in different degrees, and also various understanding of this current situation, and also various understanding of how to respond to the current situation. But then, of course, I would argue we are maybe too also kind of naive or optimistic, but we have to stay hopeful that among the group of people who take part in the front line, that they would also become more strategic when they learn from the experiences. While we seem to be commenting and trying to give support to them, that we also see opportunities where we can actually work together to try to find ways to improve things. And it's not an easy answer. There should not be any easy answer. But of course, we need to observe actually how we react to situation when the government react to our situation, and also how the participants or the stakeholders of the movement will respond to the whole situation. But definitely, of course, the good situation, the best one would be how we can maintain what we had, and even to improve what we will have. And it's always not an easy answer, because now we are living in a global environment. Everything has been so much affecting each other, and we are actually playing, each of us has been playing a small part in that, of the whole thing, and we can only do whatever we can at our best. So I do hope, and I do see, actually, I'm quite hopeful to see actually even some young people, they are having very good potential, even like what you described, like to be more pragmatic. Well, actually, I do see some. So I'm hopeful actually that they're refining their strategies, and also with various people having different interests and various aspirations, definitely would come up with something I would see would be good.
This is what I also get that feeling too. But I just want to raise a point about the frontliners. The frontliners are our warriors. They are our warriors. Every society has warriors, and the warrior needs to be trained and disciplined. This is what the military does. It constrains that force. It brings out the best in the warrior mindset, because the warrior mindset can also lean towards become a tyrannical warlord. So you want to steer away from that sort of thing. And by radicalizing, by being on the front line in that nature, you are playing with fire, because you're reaching the point where you become more and more, I forgot that word again, immune, or you don't feel the connection, which is basically what a soldier does. But a soldier is also trained, and a soldier also has the hierarchy. We don't have a military here in Hong Kong. The nearest thing is the police force, which has already been mobilized to suppress and also to actually play out these communist ideas of creating an enemy within the people. So I don't know, maybe the frontliners need to reassess their situation and organize themselves in such a way that they create it's difficult, because like now what I'm about to say is almost certainly going to be covered in this national insecurity law by creating their own military here in Hong Kong. But that's dangerous.
Well, of course, I do see your worries, and actually also something what I also heard some observers and researchers and academics also been raising this concern as well. I think that is what something we all see, that would be a possible situation, would be like getting more military, especially the frontliners. And I'm pretty sure we also hear stories of some people already been trying to get similar military training already. They prepare to die for what they think they should fight for. I mean, it's highly dangerous, of course, definitely. And then, of course, what you described, the trait of Hong Kong people, we don't want to over-generalize, but majority would be still very much pragmatic. But still, I mean, I'm blaming the government is that you actually, because of getting your own benefits by sacrificing these people, because you're making them so radical, and then you're now actually pushing them to the extreme that they would think the military training to prepare for themselves would be the only way out. And then it's also not easy for people like not adopting that mentality to persuade them to change their mind. Of course, there's a possibility, but it's highly dangerous and very difficult to change their mind as well. They would also be like fight back and like, come on, you may not understand the real situation. So it's so complicated. Now,
it really is. You're absolutely right. So when I said creating a military, I mean this purely in a sense that I do not want to see an IRA here in Hong Kong. I do not want to see bombs going off in a nightclub or in a bar that I happen to go have a few beers with my friend. This is what I'm referring to, is that element of the warrior that turns into a warlord. This is a very, very dangerous thing. So like traditionally, the way to control that warrior mentality is to put the warrior through specific rite of passage, such that you are harnessing and using the skills, the bravery of the warrior for the benefit of society, for the security of society. And instead, what's happening is quite not. It's not happening. That's not the case. In other words, the CCP, wittingly or unwittingly, are in the path of creating similar sorts of IRA type scenarios, and this needs to be curtailed immediately. Yeah, and I mean, we already know this because TATP has been brought into a few places. I mean, the quality of the TATP tells me that it's not local manufacturing. TATP process is a complex process. This was imported. So, yeah, I mean, again, looking at the government and pointing a finger at them is also, I think, the wrong mentality to do this. You shouldn't do this. It's obviously they're going to do it. This is what communism does. The communism will deliberately divide and conquer. And if you point a finger at them and say, well, you're making us do this, you are being naive. Do you see what I mean? It's don't play that game. Don't play that game of you versus me versus you, because then the CCP is happy, because now they've created a division in society. So in other words, what you do is you literally make yourself very, you give them no footholds to manipulate you. Because as soon as people start pointing fingers, it's like, well, it's your fault.
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
I do understand what you mean. Like,
Yeah.
of course,
Yeah.
like...
it's difficult. Yeah.
But of course, it's very difficult. I mean, like, because what I mentioned like earlier, like you mentioned about like the point on like military that you refer to IRA, but actually also there's a possibility even like those frontliners would be pushed to the extreme to become even more militant themselves. And of course, definitely, like for people to try to be more strategic and more diplomatic, we try to use more like a negotiable language, as we can describe that can try to calm things down.
Diplomatic language.
Yeah, and then we try to find a ways out. We can negotiate and try to resolve the problem. But then also, because of the situation, makes some people feel that they're so desperate, and they would definitely resort to more dangerous and radical means. Then for us, like we think like maybe we should try out on more moderate means and more negotiable means, and to be more strategic and try to achieve our goal. Then we will see, oh God, you also left in between, like whether you think of, okay, while we are trying to improve things, trying to do negotiation and try to improve the situation, unfortunately suddenly someone fight back and then having more radical acts, and actually it may also end up with like, oh gosh, what we originally planned didn't work. God damn it. But then like actually the unfortunate thing is for an unorganized movement, as I've described earlier, is so much chance that would end up like that. Because it's just like you see for the, well, we can quote like whether it's more successful movement in 2003 that we have the anti-Article 2023 movement. But definitely we saw the impact on like having Hung Chi-hwa resign and also Virginia Yip resign, and then the law was shelved. And that was because it was a more organized and actually also a more under control movement. And it was because related to the time, it was only 6 years after the handover. And we people like in Hong Kong felt, oh gosh, only 6 years you're trying to do it. And already make people alert. And we had the enough critical mass to put pressure on the Chinese government and Hong Kong government to rethink, not to do it now, but delay it. So that would seem to be more strategic outcome. But now they feel like, okay, we already got 23 years. You Hong Kong people, it's still so troublesome. So don't allow us to do this. You people so too resilient. You guys are too can't be controlled. You know, you spoil child. So that's why it ends up like, oh gosh. So the heavy-handed parent, they think the parent, you know, now punishing the child.
The naughty boy, yeah.
The naughty boy, you know. So that is the unfortunate situation now, and because for young people who are on the streets, they didn't actually experience 2003, and they also didn't experience the time when Hong Kong returned, when Hong Kong was handed over to China. So that was quite a different understanding of the situation, and also different feeling of the situation. So I always like try to think, if I were a teenager now, maybe would I take to street to that level? I can't tell. Maybe I would. I don't know, because it's really all like kind of different kinds of influence. You feel that you're so desperate, and then your peers have been also on the streets, and then you feel the government is not responding to you, but jailing all your friends. So, and also the police, they're not helping you. They're just beating you up. And then the only way that we can do is try to seek help from international pressure. But those who can exert seek international pressure would be those like, are you Joshua Wang? No, you're not Joshua Wang. So you're just like ordinary person, ordinary people. Then we try what we can do within our capacity, and that actually pushed people to that dangerous corner.
I think there's also an element of, youngsters, they like to one-up each other. You know, they sit around in the bedroom or in the park, and they're busy talking about like, well, would you do this? No, I'll do that. You know, but then it's always one-upping each other and gaining the respect of your peers. But then, you know, as your peers start getting taken, then hatred starts to enter the picture. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And once the strong emotion of hatred enters the picture, that's when you will start to do things that...
Exactly. Yeah. But it's all related, right? So
sure.
And it's also like, even originally you were not so interested in this.
But now you become highly politicized.
Hyper interested.
Yeah.
You push to that. Oh, so that's why we like, okay, we maybe old saying, but I feel like, gosh, I mean, like what we see, what's happening to our young people is, I mean, like while we feel also getting old, they feel like, come on, now we feel so sorry for what our generation been experiencing. So we try to, in our generation, try to do whatever, like resources, connections, and network. We try to use whatever networks within our capacity to try to help them, then we don't see any immediate results that we would think would be useful, because it's really a hard game, very difficult. And then also there's so many power dynamics, interests, different elements. It's so difficult.
I tell you, Patrick, this is another reason for me creating this Indaba process, is because, there's multiple reasons, but one of the reasons is that, you look on television, you see just like a short segment, marketing blurb. It's very easy to misrepresent something, or, to create, a narrative around this one or this one. But where do you actually sit down and listen to long discussions? Now we've been going for 2 hours and 40 minutes, right? 2 hours and 40 minutes. Where do you sit down and listen to long form discussions about these sorts of things? And, that discussion, the speech, the discussion, the dialogue that takes place before you pick up the weapons is very important. So this basically creates a stage. The media are not doing this. This is typically
they would not be interested, to be honest.
Yeah,
like the way that how we think, because it's really, it depends on like what kind of media. You can also think of yourself like kind of independent media in the way, but like for mainstream, then of course a lot of different.
They want
issues.
the clickbait now. Now it's the clickbait. It's reduce everything down to a click. Oh yeah,
how
I got
many
a little
likes
bit of money.
you get?
Yes, exactly.
How many views?
Yes,
like
yes.
for example, but like if you just tell people, oh, you don't care about that. You have a space to create space for people to do it, and immediately would ask, okay, how you calculate your impact? How could you calculate what benefits you have? Why you do it? It would not be like so pure, like you think, oh, we want to just create space for people to do it. So yeah, I do really appreciate you really have the enthusiasm to do it, because I think that we need more of this. Like if you have like young people really have a channel for them really to express themselves.
I would really like to have more youngsters, but more importantly, I want to have more people on the blue side. I want to have both sides sitting in that seat right there and going over all these different points, because people are now dehumanizing each other by saying, oh, giving you a name, you're a cockroach, oh, you're a dog. You see what I mean? I'm blue, you're yellow, and as soon as you start playing these colors games, then very shortly you're going to have IRA, you're going to have bombs going off. You don't want. I don't think Hong Kongers know what these youngsters, I don't think they know what's in store for them. And I don't think they're ready for it. I don't even think the Hong Kong government's ready for it. I don't think the policeman is ready for it.
Nobody is ready.
Nobody here in Hong Kong is ready for what's going to happen if you keep playing this game. It's going to get bad.
Yeah, I do agree.
And the CCP will be right there to mop it all up. Okay, great. Now we have a power vacuum and let's move it in. I don't know. I think we've done a pretty good covering of the situation here in Hong Kong, and some maybe motivations. Maybe is there anything else you can sort of think about or discuss? Maybe is there any sort of like ideas you want to get out into the world?
I don't know. To kind of like a short sum up, because it's something like what I've been doing my current research on is on identity. Because it's very much about how I understand, for example, what we describe on Chinese. So it's very much related to Chineseness. Because my current thesis that I'm working on, my PhD thesis, is on how we think of the concept of freedom of expression in quote-unquote Chinese societies. That we have. Is it really a Western concept? Is it really a universal value that adopted by the West only, and we Chinese has never got any sense of understanding of freedom of expression in our culture? So that actually would touch on many other things rising from it, is on how we think of our cultural identity.
Can you go into this? I mean, there is no time limit to these conversations.
Yeah.
I mean, if you like, oh my God, I'm tired, then we can stop it. But I mean, can you give me the executive summary of what you talk? Like, I personally don't think there is such a thing as, freedom of expression, freedom of speech, takes it down to the individual level, and whereas in maybe the Chinese, you probably know more about this, but I'll share my point of view. I mean,
Well, of course, I think that what I argue is there's no definite answer, but that we can base on each person. If you are interested in this topic, you do your own research. My own research is to find out, okay, when we call our culture Chinese, the Chineseness, does it stop us to think we never have a concept called freedom of expression in our culture? But is that true? I would challenge that, because it's actually even like during the dynasties, we did have a number of officials in dynasties been assigned as professional critics to give advice to the emperor. So how you describe those people? Of course, you'll also be like arguing, wow, you see many of them actually also officials in the courts would be beheaded if they say something stupid to criticize the emperor. But you see, even like in that context, they do even have that official title as someone being appointed by the emperor to be his advisor. And his job is to give critical advice to the emperor. So can we argue that actually even in our culture, even we don't have that concept of freedom of expression, but we can't say free speech has never existed in our culture? That's not true, I would argue, because it's really not true. And then how we understand the next level is how we understand what is your culture. My culture, as someone living in Hong Kong, is a mixed culture with Chinese, interaction with like people like you, or interaction with others like coming from Southeast Asia and other parts of the world. Then we all originally with different cultures, but we mix in this culture that we can no longer claim whether like concepts like a free speech strictly only coming from people like you who come from like Western countries or democracies, that you are only entitled to have this. And while people don't having that so-called more like kind of structure culture with these concepts, that we don't have this. No, I don't think we can argue that way. So that is more like kind of issue about cultural relativism.
I hear you.
Yeah.
You raise interesting points here. Okay, so my opinion on this is that I actually don't give a flying flamingo, what nationality comes up with a good idea. A good idea is like a lightning strike, and it happens to hit that particular spot. Confucianism brought out actually some pretty good concepts, like the maintaining the relationships, the balance of society with each other. Yeah. Christianity, the fundamental drive, which was benevolence, and from that, one thing that Christianity had was I am impure and God is pure, and then from having just that mentality, it allowed people to go on an exploration to study what they considered to be pure, or God, or nature, because at that time, God and nature, or the natural physics laws, were of the same quality in the hand. You can have a physics book, or the equivalent of a physics book in those days, or the Bible, and they were weighed the same. Yeah. But then, as the understanding, the God of the gaps, the gap, it started to decrease, then obviously the Bibles became less and less useful. My point is that I haven't verbalized this before. I've only thought about it. My point is that Christianity lay down the preconditions to allow people to question the environment around them and to formalize structures to be able to talk about and understand natural systems around them. And through the scientific process, developing the scientific process of discussing and making experimentation, like people didn't know that how many teeth were inside of a human being. They thought men had more teeth than women, for example, until somebody actually counted. The concept of counting was so alien. It was like, wow, you can actually count and we can know for sure. So from this point of view, it's like, oh, we can start to discuss. And then it came to the point where we realized that, well, actually, yeah, freedom of speech means that I'm actually able to diagnose, isolate problems in the environment much quicker and without having the fear of a bullet being put into my head or my head chopped off. So in some senses, there are more effective ways of isolating and diagnosing problems. And this is why I say it was like a lightning strike. This is what is considered enlightenment, which is the scientific process. And frankly speaking, I don't care where in the world that hits. Because the original China actually had very good things about it. It was a very beautiful society in some senses. Potentially because it had people like Confucius, who was hired to be the king's critic.
Yeah,
exactly.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like what you mentioned is very interesting. Like if we just go to the era where Confucius was in, that was the era that was quite interesting. A period in the quote-unquote Chinese society, because different critics were hired by different emperors during that district, because there was not a unified nation or unified dynasty during that period. There were several hundred years of having smaller states, feudal states, and like different feudal landlords, lords, and they do have their own way of like understanding like how they should run their country, run their nation. So they would adopt different schools of thoughts, and different schools of thoughts would have either something in common or very different thoughts, like Confucianism, Taoism. Taoist actually was also part of the development of that environment. And because of Taoists, actually we can say, like for Laozi and Zhuangzi, they don't think of doing anything. The way of like being nihilism
is non-action.
Well, non-action. But that would be the advice they give to emperors and for rulers. If you don't do certain things, actually it would be good for society. While Confucian is the other way around, like, okay, you should do something to try to get a good structure, to be a good emperor. Well, so you see different school of thoughts were allowed there, and there were more authoritarian thoughts at that time as well. The Fajia, so that would be more authoritarian. They say, oh, you should set a lot of rules. That you have really more like the modern understanding of like rule by law, that everyone would follow all the rules. That is the Fajia. So, and there were also other kinds of thoughts, like even more like metaphysical thoughts also. The yin yang jia, they like more metaphysical. So it's very interesting environment, and you see, you can't say, oh, it's not part of our culture. No, all our culture, we call now Chinese, came from that.
Yes.
So how can you say, oh, we didn't have any freedom of expression at all? No, no way. So that's what I'm now looking at.
This is a very interesting field of study.
Very difficult.
I should well imagine. I think there's also an element of the need for freedom of speech, or why do you I'm curious. Why do you say freedom of expression or freedom of speech? What's the difference? Is there a difference?
Well, of course,
or is it the same thing?
Well, for freedom of expression, you would say it's not just speech, but your different kinds of expression.
You're just using it. Okay.
For speech, that traditionally you just think like you say it or you write it.
Oh, I see.
But for expression, so it can be art or any forms of expression.
Okay.
So that would be.
So for probably freedom of expression would be a better way to put it. So I think, like maybe within the Chinese culture, maybe it depends that which is needed most. Do you see what I mean? Like maybe in caste India, where they had a casteal system, removing the caste would be the most important thing. Do you see what I mean? Like not being, treating everyone benevolent, the same as your brother. So like maybe within America, for example, maybe they could do with some Confucius principles of respecting the relationships that you have with each other, the relationship with the parents, with the friends, with your employer, with your son, with your children, and your wife, like that would be important for them. Whereas maybe in China, the ability to actually freely express without getting locked up or your head chopped off is important.
Well, that's a very interesting thing how we think of
relatively.
Of course, definitely, like over years, we are human, so we always find difficult, like how we interact with different cultures and different thoughts, and then, well, of course, like being just a researcher and also a student. I would not call myself a scholar, but as a student, I think we always try to be a student to understand, and also to learn new things. Then everyone can be like also having that mentality and attitude that we try to learn from each other, and we try to. I mean, like it's genuinely. I mean, it's not like presenting it diplomatically, but it's genuinely. We try to learn from each other, try to learn from each other's mistakes, and try to learn from each other's good things. And it would be, of course, definitely will be world peace, of course, right? But human, we are human. We have to admit that we have bad side of things. It's not that perfect.
And if it's too good, we might just get bored, just to introduce a bit of chaos to make it more interesting, right?
Yeah.
Like there's one thing from Confucius that I think it was Confucius or was it Mencius, I forgot, which was like if you see something that's good in somebody else, make sure that you develop
be humble, right?
No. If you see something that's good in somebody else, then make sure that you do that too.
Oh yeah.
And if you see something, and if you see something that's bad in something
resemble.
else, make sure that you don't have it and
don't
take
do
it
it.
out. Yes, I mean simple concepts like this. Which maybe they're in the West. I'm not sure, but Confucius had a really nice way, and I'm just summarizing it directly to the point, getting straight to the heart of the matter.
But I do think, like, of course, every school of thought will have, we can say, describe them as good and bad things. Like good things would be like, you see that if you describe Confucianism, that would be that we have the structure. But then it also can be, on the other hand, if you from different perspectives see, that would lose your individual preference. That because you can't focus, you can't present as, you have your individual conviction. We want to do things that we think it would be good for myself, because you have to think, would it be good for the society? Would it be good for your family? Would it be good for your structure? So
you raise a very good point, eh? It's kind of like those two viewpoints are quite. How does one balance them up, eh? Because if you're in a family where the father is considered like, and you see a problem. What? Show me your freedom of speech, son. Show me your freedom of expression, son.
And I really like you lead the discussion on Confucianism, because it's exactly like what many Chinese would claim, like, because also even like the way how we learn from textbooks, for example, that we see how we see the propaganda in the textbooks. We've been like telling us the Chinese culture been heavily influenced both by the Confucianism and also by Taoism. That we think that's the mainstream thoughts. While we also have, of course, other thoughts that we described earlier, but these two seem to be leading all the dynasties, etc., over the years. Then we can also see the government or the rulers, the people who would try to persuade you. You see,
Playing the same game. But whereas in reality, the Communist Party completely destroyed everything.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, no. Actually, you ended the Chinese culture. You ended it.
Now they try to abuse it.
Abuse it?
Seriously? Yeah, because they can claim, like, okay, although they destroyed everything about like Confucianism, as I mentioned earlier, like during.
Oh, I know what you mean.
But
Yeah.
now they're trying to use it as propaganda. Manipulate it.
Look at how great our
Culture,
society
right?
is. Culturally, 6,000 years. We are the greatest nation on earth. Just ignore what we did, like, in the cultural Marxist revolution. Forget all that.
Yeah, you see actually like traces of the response from like foreign ministry whenever they respond to criticism about China's human rights record, for example, they would quite react in such manner.
Yeah.
Very much often. They say, oh, we have several thousand years, whatever. And then also say, oh, you interfere with my internal affairs. It's so common for them to mention that. Okay, if you just taking everything like kind of only internal affairs, you're not part of the world.
Yeah.
So what's it then?
And what I also find very funny is that same department that you're talking about, isn't it very funny when they start making comments about other people, like, what they were doing?
Wow,
It's like, you piece of shit.
Isn't it an ironic gesture from them? Okay, you criticizing the U.S., etc. Then whenever people criticize you, don't interfere with your internal affairs. So
And here you are interfering with other people's internal affairs. Yeah. Typical, man. It's like communism. What's mine is mine, and what's yours is mine. That mentality. Dude, we've been going for now 3 hours. Exactly. Bang on the head. Let's wrap this up. Thank you so much.
No, thank you so much for inviting me, because it's very interesting discussion.
Yeah, great.
Very interesting.
I've benefited a
conversation.
lot from this.
Yeah, same here.
Okay, let's wrap this up. Thank you so much again. Okay, let's see. And that one's done.